let's talk about what you do at Bold Value today, and that middle market that you serve, that we serve. You have this really unique, special approach to how you serve and how you show up for people. Talk about that a bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. So we have this practice that I call strategic incentives, and it has three pillars to it: the pillar of leadership, the pillar of ownership, and the pillar of stewardship. And riding on the arc of the full business experience, the full business owner experience, we're able to bring those three things together. And what does that mean? Many of our clients are professional services companies or companies that live and die by human capital. And these days, human capital is probably the single most important, biggest asset that any company would ever have.
Yeah.
And more than just struggling with the executive compensation issues of how to attract and retain talent, it's how do you weave strategic incentives into the issues of goals, of growth, succession, and keeping the end in mind. One of the things I love to say is that there's many exit strategies, many succession strategies, but if you know which exit strategy you're working on, and I'm going to walk through 4 of them, that'll tell you an awful lot about how you want to reward on the front end. And so before I do that, I just want to distinguish between executive compensation and strategic incentives, because people get them conflated and think that they are the same exact thing. Executive compensation answers the question of how are your peers paying? What are you paying? How do you provide long and short-term incentives? And it's relatively sterile. It's relatively mathematical, and it can be almost hands-free. Every company has a strategy as to what amount of short-term, what amount of long-term incentives, but that's about as far as executive compensation goes.
Yeah.
Strategic incentives tries to weave it into the larger strategies of the organization. Really, where is the goal, the opportunity in regard to culture, in regard to career paths, in regard to what really creates value. And one of the greatest myths that we have is that all EBITDA is equal, and the more profit that a company has, the more valuable it is. And that's not necessarily true, because strategic incentives understands that you may have a software product and a services business, and the software product may trade for may trade for a whole lot more than the services business will. And so if you just reward on cash and reward based on your financial statements, you're not going to be able to do a good job. So I've really distinguished the whole difference between strategic incentives and executive compensation. And keeping the end in mind, we talk about 4 different succession pathways. Right. And these are really important, Michael. And if there's anything, anyone walks away with, it's understanding these 4. So the first one is moving towards a change of control. And that, I know you're working with family-owned businesses. Some family businesses, say that once we hit a certain milestone, a certain size, et cetera, or a certain value, we're going to sell. Some want to be there perpetually. But that's a different kind of objective from a second kind of succession pathway, which is a perpetual business. Mm-hmm. We think about perpetual businesses like partnerships, law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms, architecture firms. They may not have family in them, but they necessarily are organizations that want to stay at least 2 to 3 to 4 generations of management. Generation management is probably 7 to 10 years. A third succession pathway is keep it in the family. And when you want to keep it in the family, you typically have a generational gap between those that are older have learned the business, and those that are younger that are not yet ready. And the key issue with a keep it in the family business is, how do you bring on professional management and give them a reward that doesn't mess up your estate planning and all those kind of elements like that. And then a fourth succession path is an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, which is a way to get some liquidity out of a business, keep management control over it. And that requires a whole different kind of incentive plan because of the gyrating value of an ESOP as you go through the recapitalization of the ESOP over time. So knowing whether or not you are going to do strategic incentives around change of control, around a perpetual business, whether or not you're going to do it around a family-owned business, or whether or not you do it around ESOP, is critically important. And with that end in mind, then you can come back in and have a better view of executive compensation, strategic incentives, and make the whole thing work together.
Yeah.
And we've had clients turn to us and say, we've just never seen an approach like this. And thank you so much for doing it.
It's, as we talk about, we're both in the business exit planning space. And that's really one of the most important conversations that we have with a client, is helping them to understand the number of different options that are available there, and then helping them to get through to understand what is their objective. Because if, Simon Sinek, begin with the end in mind, right? If we don't know where you want to go, how are we going to know if you got there?